Hi, my name is Molly Anderson. I'll be reading Chapter 1 of The Secret Life of Bees, written by Sue Monk-Kidd. At night, I would lie in bed and watch the show. How bees squeezed through the cracks of my bedroom wall and flew circles around the room, making that propeller sound, a high-pitched zzz that hummed along my skin. I watched their wings shining like bits of chrome in the dark and felt a longing build in my chest. The way those bees flew, not even looking for a flower or just flying for the feel of the wind, split my heart down at seam. During the day, I heard them tunneling through the walls of my bedroom, sounding like a radio tuned to the static in the next room, and I imagined them in there turning the walls into honeycombs, with honey seeping out for me to taste. The bees came in the summer of 1964, the summer I turned 14 and my life went spinning off into a whole new orbit. And I mean a whole new orbit. Looking back on it now, I want to say the bees were sent to me. I want to say they showed up like the angel Gabriel appearing to the Virgin Mary, setting events in motion I could never have guessed. I know it is presumptuous to compare my small life to hers, but I have reason to believe that she wouldn't mind. I will get to that. Right now it's enough to say that despite everything that happened this summer, I remain tender towards the bees. July 1st, 1964, I lay in bed waiting for the bees to show up, thinking of what Rosaline had said when I told her about their nightly visitations. "Bees swarm before death," she said. Rosaline had worked for us since my mother died. My daddy, who I called T-Ray because Daddy never fit him, had pulled her out of the peach orchard where she'd worked as one of his pickers. She had a big round face and a body that sloped out from her neck like a pup tent. She was so black that the night seemed to seep from her skin. She lived alone in a little house tucked back in the woods, not far from us, and came every day to cook, clean, and be my stand-in mother. Rosaline had never had a child herself, so for the past 10 years I'd been her pet guinea pig. Bees swarm before death. She was full of crazy ideas that I ignored, but I lay there thinking about this one, wondering if the bees had come with my death in mind. Honestly, I wasn't that disturbed by the idea. Every one of those bees could have descended on me like a flock of angels and stung me till I died, and I wouldn't have been the worst thing to happen. People who think dying is the worst to happen don't know a thing about life. My mother died when I was 4 years old. It was a fact of life, but if it got brought up, people would suddenly get interested in their hangnails and cuticles, or else distant places in the sky, and seem not to hear me. Once in a while, though, some caring soul would say, "Just put it out of your head, Lily. It was an accident. You didn't mean to do it." That night I'd lay in bed and thought about dying and going to be with my mother in paradise. I would meet her saying, "Mother, forgive, please forgive." And she would kiss my skin until it grew chapped and tell me I was not to blame. She would tell me this for the first 10,000 years. The next 10,000 years she would fix my hair. She would brush it into such a tower of beauty, people all over heaven would drop their harps just to admire it. You can tell which girls lack mothers by the look of their hair. My hair was constantly going off in 11 wrong directions, and T-Ray, naturally, refused to buy me Bristol rollers. So all year I'd have to roll in Welch's grape juice cans, which had nearly turned me into an insomniac. I was always having to choose between decent hair and a good night's sleep. I decided I would take 4 or 5 centuries to tell her about the special misery of living with T-Ray. He had an orneriness year-round, but especially in the summer when he worked his peach orchards daylight to dusk. Mostly I stayed out of his way. His only kindness was for Snout, his bird dog, who slept in his bed and got her stomach scratched every time she rolled on her wiry back. I've seen Snout pee on T-Ray's boot and it not get a rise out of him. I had asked God repeatedly to do something about T-Ray. He'd gone to church for 40 years and was only getting worse. It seemed like this should tell God something. I kicked back the sheets. The room sat in perfect stillness, not one bee anywhere. Every minute I looked at the clock on my dresser and wondered what was keeping them. Finally, sometime close to midnight, when my eyelids had nearly given up on the strain of staying open, a purring noise came over in the corner, low and vibrating, a sound you could almost mistake for a cat. Moments later, shadows moved like spatter paint along the walls, catching the light when they passed the windows so you could see the outline of wings. The sound swelled in the dark till the entire room was pulsating, till the air itself became alive and matted with bees. They lapped around my body, making me the perfect center of a whirlwind cloud. I could not hear myself think for all the bee hum. I dug my nails into the palms of my skin and nearly turned into herringbone. A person could get stung half to death in a room full of bees. Still, the sight was a true spectacle. Suddenly, I couldn't stand not showing it off to somebody, even if the only person around was T-Ray. And if he had happened to get stung by a couple of hundred bees, well, I was sorry. I slid from the covers and dashed through the bees for the door. I woke him by touching his arm with one finger, softly at first, then harder and harder till I was jabbing into his flesh, marveling at how hard it was. T-Ray bolted from bed, wearing nothing but his underwear. I dragged him toward my room, him shouting how this better be good, how the house darn well better be on fire, and Snout barking like we were on a dove shoot. Bees! I shouted, there's a swarm of bees in my room. And when we got there, they'd vanished back into the wall, like they knew he was coming, like they didn't want to waste their flying stunts on him. Dagnabbit, Lily, this ain't funny. I looked up and down the walls. I got down under the bed and begged the very dust and coils of my bed springs to produce a bee. They were here, I said, flying everywhere. Yeah, and there was a dagnam herd of buffalo in here too. Listen, I said, you can still hear 'em buzzing. He cocked his ear towards the wall with pretend seriousness. I don't hear any buzzing, he said, twirled his finger beside his temple. I guess they must have flown out of that cuckoo clock you call a brain. You wake me up again, Lily, and I'll get out the Martha Whites. You hear me? Martha Whites were a form of punishment only T-Ray could have dreamed up. I shut my mouth instantly. Still, I couldn't let the matter go entirely. T-Ray thinking I was so desperate I would invent an invasion of bees to get attention. Which is how I got the bright idea of catching a jar of these bees, presenting them to T-Ray, and saying, now who's making things up? My first and only memory of my mother was the day she died. I tried for a long time to conjure up an image of her. Before that, just a sliver of something, like her tucking me into bed, reading the adventures of Uncle Wiggily, or hanging my underclothes near the space heater on ice-cold mornings. Even her picking a switch off the Forsythia brush and stinging my legs would have been welcome. Thanks for listening.